Time for sound design. Wait, no headphones, no sound design? That's right. Today I'm going to talk about books. I selected 7 books that I think are great, they're inspiring or insightful in some way, and I want to talk to you about these books, briefly go through them, what they are about, and perhaps that is something you're interested in. So I will go through them in no particular order. Let's get started with the one that is maybe the most obvious. If you have seen any of my previous videos on this channel, you know that I'm a heavy Ableton Live user. So the first book I want to talk about is this one, Making Music from Ableton, 74 Creative Strategies for Electronic Music Producers. So this book is written by Dennis DeSantis, who works at Ableton. And even though there are screenshots of Ableton in this book used to exemplify the ideas, it's not tied to Ableton software. So regardless of what software or hardware you use, this is an interesting book. The book is divided in 3 parts. It talks about the problems of beginning, problems of progressing, and problems of finishing music. There are 74 problems that are discussed. So what it looks like is, on one hand, you have the problem discussed, and then there's a solution. And this is not a book that you necessarily read cover to cover when you get it, but this is more something you can just pick parts out, either when you're stuck or when you want some kind of inspiration. And the great thing is it's well suited for beginners and for more advanced producers. So I think it's a very hands-on way of talking about the ideas of how to start, progress, or finish your music without talking about the gear and the tools. So you can apply this to anything. I think this is a must read, even if you don't use Ableton. Book number 2 is In Search of a Concrete Music by Pierre Schaeffer. This is the translated version into English. So Pierre Schaeffer is a French composer, one of the founding fathers of musique concrète. And in this book, he talks about what was the idea of using everyday sounds, non-musical sounds, to create music from. So if you are into sampling, this is basically where it started. Way before hip-hop started sampling, this was the kind of music that tried to use non-musical sounds in a musical context. And nowadays that is very normal to do. A lot of electronic music producers use field recordings and recording objects and a lot of film music and Foley. This is normal, but at the time this was revolutionary and of course way more difficult with tape to create it than it is nowadays. So it's a great history lesson on musique concrète, on early sampling basically, and it's really well written and quite easy to read, I would say. So another must read if you're into sampling and sound design. Book tip number 3 is a bit more light. It's the book is called Back to the Lab, Hip Hop Home Studios, this one. And it's mostly photographs of home studios of hip hop producers. So for instance, there is Ant from Atmosphere, from Minnesota, the indie rap group. What is great about this book is that it's just nice to browse through, see all the sort of the behind the scenes, the studios, the equipment they use. And it also kind of makes you realize that a lot of these great records are produced in home studios with not necessarily high-end gear. So MPCs 2000 XL, for instance, ASR keyboards. But it's just a great kind of browsing through. There's some texts in it, but not a lot. It's just more inspirational, I would say. Then onto something more insightful, and that is Mixing Secrets for the Small Studio by Mike Senior from Sound on Sound. And this is a great book to understand better how you should mix your music. It is aimed for the small studio, so that's the first thing that is great about this book. It is describing very kind of plain language and very basic language, I would say, the technicalities of mixing music, whether it's electronic music or any kind of music. So the book is divided in 4 parts: the hearing and listening, mix preparation, balance, so that's about EQ a lot, and sweetening to taste, so that is about using effects like reverbs and delays. And as you can see, I put some notes in there because there are very specific things that you can learn from this that you can directly apply if you make music in a DAW like Ableton. Just as an example from this book, what is great, I think in chapter 9 they talk about compression. So they really explain what is compression, what is it used for, what are the different sort of parameters of a compressor, what do. They have this diagrams with waveforms of uncompressed and compressed audio, so you can really understand what is going on. And the whole book is written without any particular software in mind. So it is really general, and whatever software you use, you can apply these principles. Then on to book tip number 5, again an inspirational one. This is Pedal Crush Stompbox Effects for Creative Music Making. Again, if you have seen any of my previous videos, you might know that I'm really into effects. I use them a lot to shape sounds, to create wild sounds. I often stack multiple effects. I have a bunch of guitar pedals as well. I also use a lot of effects in Ableton. So this is a great inspirational book. It's categorized by effect type. So you have delays, reverbs, distortions. And it kind of describes all the different pedals, or many of the different pedals that are there, the classics. It's kind of a coffee table book. It's great to browse through and see all the things that they're out there. But I would say the most interesting thing about this book is the interviews that are there with artists and also pedal makers. So for instance, there's an interview with Ed O'Brien from Radiohead, who talks about his pedal board. And there's a bunch of interviews with manufacturers of pedals that actually explain what is their intention, what is their idea, why do they make the kind of pedals they make. So that was Pedal Crush. And then on to something a little bit more serious, composition. So tip number 6 is a book called Composing with Constraints, 100 Practical Exercises in Music Composition. So this book goes a bit more into the theory of composition, and it gives you exercises on how to compose. It has staves with notes on them, so if you might want to look into that if you're not familiar with reading music. But at the same time, I think since they're exercises, it's quite practical. You can pick an exercise and try it out in Ableton. This is also not written for any kind of instrument, so you can just use a synthesizer to apply these exercises. It's not specifically for electronic music, but it also doesn't limit you to use it for electronic music. So it's a great kind of way to get out of your usual way of writing music. It broadens your horizon. And then the last book tip, number 7, is kind of a bonus. It's for all my Dutch viewers, since it's a Dutch book. It's called Onderstroom, The History of Electronic Music in the Netherlands. I'm not sure if this one is translated in English. I don't think so. But this is a great book, and it talks about all the key people in the 40s and 50s in the Netherlands exploring electronic music. Some of that music you can actually find on Spotify. And it talks about also the key places. So for instance, Philips Electronics in Eindhoven, they built a electronic music lab where they had a few people that were tasked with exploring electronic music. Like, can you create compositions with this test equipment and early synthesizers. It's a great history book, overview of how electronic music developed in the Netherlands. I guess many people are familiar with the history in the UK and maybe Germany and in the US, but I heard some of the names, but to really get the whole story, I think it's super interesting. That's it for this video. I will link to all the books in the description of this video, and let me know in the comments what are your favorite music books, whether it's about specific artists, genres, technology, songwriting, composition. Keep making music, keep reading about music, and see you in the next one.